Good morning, everybody. I'm Christine Jacobs, and I'm the Executive Director of Represent PA. And Represent is the largest PAC in Pennsylvania that gives money to people running for state legislature. And not just people. We give money to women running for the Pennsylvania House and the Senate. We have found over the years that women are underrepresented. We've been one of the worst states in the country in terms of electing women. And we decided about 6 years ago to do something about that. Last cycle, in the 2020 cycle, we raised and then we invested $500,000 in women running for legislature. Some were successful, some were not, and we're already working on what our plans are to really make change. And what we decided to do in 2021 is to really go through and start highlighting what are the reasons that we want to elect progressive women to the state legislature. What difference would it make to have a different legislative makeup? And we really feel strongly that one of the ways that we can highlight this for people of Pennsylvania is to talk about what would be different in the legislature if we had a Democratic majority. What would be different if we had people who wanted to talk about issues and wanted to talk about things that are important to Pennsylvanians. And so that's why we developed this whole series of breakfast briefings during the election cycle, and we've decided to continue them into 2021 just to lay the groundwork for change in 2022's elections. We've got one coming up and you'll hear about it later. We're going to talk to someone about what's going on with women and women in elections and how are women faring nationally as well as in Pennsylvania. But this subject came up in our last call. Our last discussion was what happened in the elections. And one of the discussions we had in that was, what are the things that are coming up soon that we should be paying attention to in the legislature? And this whole idea of a congressional constitutional change and an amendment districting the Supreme Court. And what does that mean? Why should you care? And what can you do about it? And it all gets into what we refer to as the power of the majority. So today we're really pleased to have a couple strong speakers. We have Debbie Gross, who's the president of Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts. Debbie has a long history in the legal community in Philadelphia, including she's the past, I don't know what it's called, chair of the Philadelphia Bar. I know it has a fancier legally sounding name than that. And Debbie is now actively working on making sure that we have a modern court system in Pennsylvania. We also have on the call Carol Kuniholm. Some of you sat in on the call that we did during the fall, where we specifically focused on gerrymandering, and we focused on what is going on in terms of, what can we expect post-census reports on what is going to happen in terms of how legislative and congressional districts are drawn. And Carol talked about that and what are the issues there. Carol is also very active in this issue around, well, as long as the state has gerrymandered legislative districts, let's also gerrymander the Supreme Court. And so she's become very active in that issue. And she and Debbie are both been speaking on this, and we decided it was something that we should bring to the Represent community. As I said, we do not think the Pennsylvania legislature is responsive to the needs of Pennsylvanians. And we want to talk about how do we highlight the major issues in the state. We want to talk, and then we're going to continue our own analysis in 2021 of what we can do to help our core mission. What should we do and how do we support others? And then we want to communicate our views to Represent's donors and friends. But just look at what's been going on in the news in the last few weeks in the Pennsylvania legislature. And it's quite striking. First of all, in the Pennsylvania Senate, Jim Brewster won by less than 100 votes in the district. And yet the Pennsylvania Senate refuses to seat him. The Republican majority in the Pennsylvania Senate refuses to seat him. It's been appealed. It's gone all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and they've said it was a valid election. It was a valid process. He is the winner, and it's been certified by the court system and by our Secretary of State. But the Senate refuses to seat him. What is that? Does that not echo what's going on in Washington, D.C.? Shouldn't these people in Harrisburg be worried about issues that are important to Pennsylvanians and not their own power structure. We also had, there's been some things in the news about Senator Mastriano, who has been, who chartered a bus and took a whole busload of people to DC for the Trump rally this past week. He maintains that he did not go into the Capitol building himself, and he's, therefore he did nothing illegal. But the fact that he chartered a busload and he took people down there has been under question. And the Senate chair says that, oh, it's okay. He wasn't, he didn't do anything illegal. But is this really what the kind of representative we want to have in Harrisburg? Another thing that's come up is, and this is not dealing with Harrisburg, but did you see the list of who in Congress signed on to the Pennsylvania elections were illegal? It was 8 Republican congressmen from, and I say men, Republican congressmen from Pennsylvania, 8 of the 9 Republican congressmen from Pennsylvania all signed on to this, that the election was illegal. This was an election in which they were all voted in. They all accepted their elections, but aren't accepting the results for the Trump election. Are these the kind of people we want representing us in government? And these are the kind of things that we're thinking about, we want you to be thinking about. At our last briefing that we did on what we did how we did in the elections, Risa Kossoff of the SEIU talked a lot about her view of the elections, and it was a really detailed and comprehensive understanding. But we did ask her, what are the next things coming up? And then she talked about this constitutional amendment on the judiciary. And I'm sure that after you hear our speakers today, you'll be asking what you can do. So please, Debbie.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you all for participating. This is we just had a program last night, the night before, so this is something that is a urgent priority, so I very much appreciate your timeliness. The bill has now been given an official name. It's called House Bill 38, and it deals with judicial redistricting. I'm going to start with some basics. You know, what does this bill do? So it is proposing a constitutional amendment to Pennsylvania's constitution to change the way we vote for our appellate court judges. So currently, we vote for all appellate court judges when they are up for election or for retention. The proposed amendment is going to change this and say we can only vote for 1 Supreme Court judge, 1 Superior Court judge, and 1 Commonwealth Court judge in our district. Let's take a step back. And I want you to understand how Pennsylvania courts work. We have a triangular system, I will say. Most cases don't get to the appellate with at the municipal court or magisterial court.
Debbie, can you go full screen on this?
Can I? Yes, let's figure that out. Does that work?
Better.
Okay. So this is our structure for our court system in Pennsylvania. And so most people, again, don't experience a case or that goes to an appellate court. But most people enter the court system in a court of limited jurisdiction, which in Philadelphia is known as a municipal court, and outside of Philadelphia is known as magisterial courts. Pittsburgh, they're also known as municipal courts. You also can enter the court system, I will say, through the Court of Common Pleas. So quickly, municipal courts in Philadelphia are for criminal offenses or for civil issues under a certain dollar amount. There are no jury trials. The Court of Common Pleas hears appeals from these minor courts, but also, you know, anything above a certain dollar amount holds jury trials. The appellate courts are those are the courts that are an issue here. We all vote for municipal courts judges across the board. These are local judges, you know, local elections, and we vote for them. I will let you know, Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts does not think electing judges is a good thing. We support merit selection, but that's not the issue here today, but I'm just giving you an aside. Okay, so appellate courts in Pennsylvania are the Superior Court, the Commonwealth Court, and the Supreme Court. And they hear appeals from these lower courts. So therefore, not all cases that are decided get appealed, and they have different responsibilities. The Commonwealth Court does hear original actions brought by and against the Commonwealth. The Superior Court does hear appeals, and then any appeals from the Superior or Commonwealth Court go to the Supreme Court, which is the ultimate authority on matters in Pennsylvania brought before the lower courts. Again, their review is discretionary. They do not take every case. We have over 100,000 cases filed a year in the lower courts in Pennsylvania. The Supreme Court handles a very small percent of those matters. Currently, we elect 7 Supreme Court judges, 15 Superior Court judges, and 10 Commonwealth Court judges. What this bill proposes is to divide the state into different districts. So the state would be divided into 7 Supreme Court districts, 15 Superior Court districts, and 10 Commonwealth Court districts. The alleged, and I'm using that term as a lawyer, right, justification for this change is, and it's put in the bill, is that it organizes the judiciary into representative districts and further provides for residency requirements for judges. It's giving every resident an approximately equal representation on the court. How is that being done? Because they are going to figure out that each judicial district shall be composed of compact and contiguous territory, and no will be divided. This sounds certainly familiar to what they are doing for the voter redistricting. So what does this bill do? It actually changes, right? It changes it harms the independence of a judge, because it's of an appellate court judge, because it's making this appellate court judge responsible to their direct constituencies. Appellate court judges decide based on the law, the Constitution, rules, and cases. They should not be concerned with how their constituency believes a matter should be decided, how their constituency interprets the law. The judge's loyalty is not to a person, business, political party, but it's to the law, Constitution, rules, and cases. So the problems this bill creates, right? It threatens the judge's independence. The judge has to constantly, could potentially be looking over the judge could be concerned that, oh, I know I am up for retention, so therefore I have to be careful how I decide this case. One of my conversations with a former appellate court judge, actually in the conversation last night, the former justice of the Supreme Court, was talking about a situation where she knew a judge in a smaller county had decided a matter against a party, right? You have a case, somebody's typically going to be happy with the result, somebody typically will be unhappy. So the unhappy person with the judge's decision went on a campaign to prevent this judge from being retained. This is what this bill would, a serious problem this bill could create, because it would hurt this judge's independence. It disenfranchises voters. As we've said, you can right now vote for every judge in the state, every appellate court judge, every lower court judge. You will no longer have that opportunity. So you may only be voting for one judge every 10 years. You won't even know what is happening in the state, because you'll just be without any kind of interest in the judiciary. It creates a potential for greater influence of money. It makes judges politicians, right? They have to go out, they're campaigning, they have to be responsible to their electorate. It's harmful to the diversity of the court. It harms the public's confidence in the courts. I spoke to another former appellate court judge who talked about judges actually trading decisions when they know that it's time for their retention. That they would say, oh, this bill, or this case is disconcerting or could create a problem for me in my limited region district. So can you write the opinion on it? The bill also has, and I'm keeping an eye on time, Chris, because I want Carol to have some time as well. The bill itself, the language in the bill is so unclear. It's written that way intentionally. It says that the General Assembly shall establish the judicial districts, determine the transition to the system, establish the order of election, determine the eligibility to seek retention. The boundary and numbers with respect to the regions and districts are to be established by the General Assembly with the advice and consent of the Supreme Court. So what does this really mean? Does this mean that all judges will be removed at the same time, a clean slate? Will judges not be entitled or permitted to run for retention, which is written into our laws as exists? Will they decide, okay, one judge can run for retention because the district in which he or she resides is fine, but another judge who's in a district where there are 2 or 3 judges from can't run for retention? Will this redistricting take place first in the Supreme Court? You know, we'll first go through 7 Supreme Court elections, then it'll go to the Superior Court and then to the Commonwealth Court. There is no guidance in this bill, and we are leaving it entirely up to the General Assembly. So why are we here? This bill arose because of the General Assembly's displeasure with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court rulings. Recently, with the COVID shutdowns and Governor Wolf's orders, with the election, you know, the fraud on the election, but previously it started honestly with the Supreme Court's ruling on the voting districts. This bill was originally brought before the House in 2019. It was approved. And Carol will discuss how this bill would, how quickly and the speed with which this bill was approved. But I spoke to representatives who actually supported merit selection and supported this bill. And I said to them, I don't understand how you can justify both. And they said, well, I know this bill is bad, but it's going to die in the vine in November because the House will change. Unfortunately, we know the House didn't change. So I then recently reached out to those representatives again, and they said, don't worry, it will die in the referendum. Well, if they think this is bad law, then why are they supporting it? And the reason is that they want to prove a point. They want to hold judges accountable. And you can't hold, there are ways to hold judges accountable, and that's if they do something, you know, ethically wrong. You can then there's a way, a process to hold them accountable, but to hold them accountable simply for a decision that they have been rendered, that threatens their independence. I'm gonna let Carol take it from here, and then I can come back on, but I want to make sure that we have time for everything. And I know Carol wanted to discuss the legislative history.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that to us. And Debbie gave the kind of the legal background on this. I want to put it just in a little political context, and then we will have time to take your questions. The way Fair Districts PA came to this topic is we were formed to address gerrymandering, which we know is the manipulation of electoral maps for political advantage. And we know it's been a problem for a long time, but we know it's become much worse because of mapping technology and data technology, the ability to see how people register to vote, how they vote, to see voting patterns, to predict voting patterns. And it's gotten so that the people who draw the maps can really fine tune the outcome of elections and really predict and bake in the outcome of elections for a long time, which is why there was the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania lawsuit, which Debbie mentioned, and this decision in 2018 that map our congressional map drawn in 2011 had locked in an advantage to Republicans of 13-5, no matter what the voters did. And we saw after it changed that there's suddenly 4 women in Congress, which is a wonderful thing. That would not have happened without that map being called unlawful by our Supreme Court. But as Debbie said, the legislators were furious, and they continue to be furious. And we actually saw the first rendition of this Judicial District Bill attached to a bill that we had addressing gerrymandering in 2018. The bill had been voted out of committee. We had done a lot of negotiating to get that bill out of committee. And then at the very last minute, on the Senate floor, this Judicial District Bill was attached to it as an amendment. And when it went to the House, it got buried under over 600 amendments and didn't see the light of day, but then was reintroduced as its own bill the next year. What we know for sure is that Pennsylvanians do not like gerrymandering and want it to end. It's not, we don't want more gerrymandering, we want less gerrymandering. And we've had various surveys showing why people don't like gerrymandering. It puts party leaders, makes it possible for party leaders to put party interests ahead of voters' interests. It creates polarization and gridlock. And I would say we are seeing a through line this week from gerrymandering, creating unaccountable districts, which aggravate polarization and gridlock, because the people in those districts then play to their most extreme constituents, because those are the people who can primary them. And we've heard the threats of primarying are more moderate Republicans. That's been going on since the November election. And we're seeing how there are legislators who consider themselves really unaccountable to anybody. And in fact, Ryan Fitzpatrick, the congressman who did not speak out against our elections, he introduced his first day in Congress last session. He introduced a bill to address gerrymandering because he worked with the FBI on political crime before he went to Congress. And he said there's a tight connection between gerrymandered districts and fraud and political crime, because people in gerrymandered safe districts consider themselves above the law. They consider the law to have no reach to them. They can do what they want. And part of the fury around this particular attempt to address the higher courts is that the courts have said, no, you are not above the law. And the law tells you how to draw a district, you better draw it that way. And you're not above the law in saying that you're not going to accept votes. You have to accept them. So this is an attempt for those unaccountable legislators to say, the law has no reach toward us. We are going to take charge of the law. And that's a dangerous place to be in. People also feel like gerrymandering lets elected officials choose their voters. In this way, the legislators would be choosing their judiciary. And that is also a dangerous thing to do. And it also makes it less possible for voters to hold their representatives accountable, which, as I said, we are seeing in the way things played out in Pennsylvania's capital this week and in Congress as well. We know that 67% and surveys across the country, across the past decade, have shown that about 2/3 of voters think that legislators should have no role in voting, in drawing voting districts. They think this is not something legislators should do. We should have independent citizens commissions. So voters don't like gerrymandering, and yet our legislature is introducing a new opportunity, an unprecedented opportunity for gerrymandering our judicial districts as well. And Debbie explained about the bill. Well, let me go back. The bills we introduced had a lot of co-sponsorship, a lot of support, never got any vote, huge rally, never got a vote. This bill, House Bill 196, came out of the blue, kind of. There was no public support. There was no public outcry for this bill. This was hatched in the back rooms of Harrisburg in our state capital. And as Debbie said, it moved very quickly. It was introduced in January 2019. It was voted out of the House Judiciary Committee in April of 2019. We cannot find a transcript anywhere on the General Assembly website. There is no transcript. And there was no public hearing. There was no invitation for groups like Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts to submit testimony. There is nothing of that on the General Assembly website, although we do know that there were groups that submitted testimony, sent letters to committee chairs and committee members. None of that made it into the public view. It was passed in the House in 2019. It was voted out of the Senate State Government Committee in July 13, 2020. And that is a fascinating thing. If there's a, you can find the live stream of that 9 minutes. So in the Senate, the committee that is supposed to decide a constitutional amendment 9 minutes to describe the bill, which was a much shorter description than Debbie gave you. There was a question from one senator about what's the rationale. The explanation of rationale was much shorter than what Debbie just explained to you. There was a senator who read a few moments of opposition from the Pennsylvania Bar Association, silence, and then a vote. That was it. In our Senate State Government Committee, that was the amount of due diligence given to this bill, and it was passed just 2 days later. And any attempt to amend it was immediately blocked by calling the question, and that bill went through. No expert testimony or public input, no cross-partisan support. It went flying through. We see it as a pirate ship stealing across the sea, taking away our constitutional protections and the constitutional safeguards that keep one branch of government from taking power from the others. So Debbie explained what this does. I'm not going to go into it, but the question of why, well, I do want to look at the language. So the language in the bill itself, it says it organizes the judiciary into representative districts. And I would say strongly, this misunderstands what the judiciary is intended to do. It is not intended to represent us. Judges do not have constituencies, and our legislators are the ones who are supposed to represent us, which they do not do. And the suggestion that judges would represent us is a complete misunderstanding of the purpose of the courts. According to Prime Sponsor Representative Russ Diamond, there are different philosophies on how to apply the law based on how and where you grew up. I would say, really? Can you demonstrate that? Can you prove that? And yes, there are different philosophies on the law based on a lot of different things, but this is probably the least important when you start to think about it.
Carol, I just want to interrupt you. There may be different philosophies on the law, but the judges don't use that to make determinations. They have to, you know, if you're an originalist, you follow the word. There are cases, there are statutes that have the Constitution have to be applied as they are written.
Yeah.
So they typically don't bring in their own personal viewpoints.
Yeah, the one senator who spoke on behalf of the bill in the State Senate Government Committee said there has never been an appellate judge from the county of York, as if that matters. I mean, we've got 67 counties in Pennsylvania. Is a judge from York going to interpret the law differently than a judge from Cumberland County, which is the next county north, which has had numerous judges? It's a rather ridiculous argument.
Interesting choice of example of a judge. So everybody knows there was actually a York County judge last year who was is being disciplined because of his treatment of a homeless person, and making this person, and at his hearing, wear a placard that says, "I am a shoplifter," and walking around with it. So interesting choice.
Wow, that is a very interesting choice. Who would draw the judicial districts? This is an interesting one. The legislative leaders and staff, the same people who drew our congressional districts. The bill says the legislature, but we know the legislature, that's 253 people. They're not drawing the map. There are people behind the scenes who are drawing those maps. It's the same structure, the same process that gave us Congressional District 7 and that unlawful district map, Goofy Kicking Donald, and there's nothing in the bill that gives safeguards against that. So there's no safeguards against partisan gerrymandering written into the bill. And as Debbie said, the rationale is to ensure diversity, to give diversity, and it doesn't really do that. Right now, there's an almost even party split with 16 Republicans, 14 Democrats, 1 vacancy. Amazingly, there are quite a few women on the higher courts, 3 of 7 in the Supreme Court, 6 on the Commonwealth Court, 11 of 15 in the Superior Court, which is terrific. This is a graphic that has been circulated, at least among the legislators, to explain why this bill is so necessary. And there's something really odd about it. It says that the jurists from Allegheny and Philadelphia County currently hold 21 of 39 appellate court seats. There are not 39 appellate court seats, as Debbie pointed out, there's 31. And this is really saying that it's measuring, you know, where people are when they're elected. In reality, we have judges who were from different parts of the state. They might end up in the course of their career in Allegheny County or Philadelphia, but there are quite a few who are from other places, which we've kind of tried to document. Of all those green stars are places where our current high court judges grew up or have lived or even live now. The orange stars are, of course, you know, Philadelphia and Allegheny County. And when we look at connections to other counties, either they lived there, grew up there, were born there, there's not that big of a difference between the state population and the percentage of judges from Allegheny and Philadelphia. If you say, well, where they live now is the only thing that shaped them, then maybe you get close to Russ Diamond's percentage. But if you look at the full biography, and we didn't actually go into the whole, you know, did they move around in other counties? We didn't get that far into the weeds. But there's really not a problem with regional diversity. The place that there really is a problem is if you look at our courts, you will see almost no racial diversity at all. There is one African-American woman, no men of color. And when you look at the Pennsylvania population, a quarter of the Pennsylvania population is people of color. Less than 4% of our appellate court judges are people of color. So this doesn't really address diversity, and it would not fix that. And there are better ways to get there. And I would say a consideration to think about is even the diversity of judicial experience. I know at the federal level, there's been conversation about the fact that that many of our judges are from corporate backgrounds, and the current selection process we have in Pennsylvania does nothing to ensure that there are judges from public interest or from public defenders. There's very little diversity in the judiciary, and this doesn't address the more important kinds of diversity that we could have. Debbie also said that there are legislators who say, oh, you know, this will be solved at the referendum. We'll just let the people of Pennsylvania decide. We've asked to be allowed to decide on lots of issues. The merit selection of judges has been an issue people in Pennsylvania have been asking to decide since 1949. The League of Women Voters has been asking for a vote and a voice on that issue. Changes to the redistricting process, we've been asking, League of Women Voters has been asking for a voice on that for 30 years. And certainly Fair Districts has made clear in every way we can think of that the people of Pennsylvania would like to be allowed to decide, can we have an independent redistricting commission? That decision is not given to us. The same legislators who say, let's let the people decide on judicial districts have blocked every chance for a vote on redistricting reform and many other reforms. So it's not as if they want the people to decide, they want to push this forward. This bill also leaves key questions unanswered, and Debbie mentioned some. How would the transition be handled? What happens when judges from the same court end up in the same district? Can legislators decide which judges can continue in a district, which can't? Can they use the bill to remove or punish individual justices for decisions legislators don't like? Seems quite obvious that they can. So either this bill is sloppy, hasty, and poorly drafted, or it was intentionally written to leave those questions unanswered. How many other states do this? This is an important one. None. There are no other states that do this. Most states have moved to nonpartisan judicial elections, or even more states have moved to a merit-based selection process. There are 9 states that have partisan elections for appellate courts at one level or more. Just 6 have partisan elections for all appellate courts. There are 2 states, Illinois and Louisiana, who have partisan district elections for appellate courts, and those districts are written into law and rarely redrawn. They can't be redrawn every 10 years by their state legislature. In Illinois, those districts have been in place for 50 years. In Louisiana, the bill putting this process in place was drafted in, I believe, 1999, and requires a 2/3 vote by the legislature to even suggest that the districts be redrawn. So it's not, there are no other states that allow the legislature a regular, consistent opportunity to gerrymander. And this would be a new form of gerrymandering, an unprecedented new form of gerrymandering in a new historic low. I think it's important to point this out when legislators talk about this, to say, this is not done anywhere else. And it opens the door for a new way of gerrymandering. It's unacceptable. Is there opposition to this bill? Yes, plenty. There was no formal testimony invited. As I said, no testimony posted in the General Assembly website, nothing addressed in any hearings or debates. The Pennsylvania Bar Association said this puts too much political influence, and an independent judiciary is central to the success of a Republican form of government. Electing judges by individual district is contrary to one of the key purposes of a statewide appellate court, which is to render decisions that have statewide impact, really free from the local influence which Debbie talked about. And judges should not have constituencies. They should have litigants before them that expect them to apply the law without bias or other considerations. We know that Committee of 70 submitted letters. We know that Common Cause submitted letters. We know that Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts submitted letters. None of those ended up in public view. You have to find them on their websites. And we know that other bar associations and legal organizations submitted testimony. None of that was put in the public view. Total time spent on this amendment in any public legislative setting, less than an hour. And as I said, some of the transcripts are not available and you can't actually find out what was said. Questions weren't answered, objections were not responded to, all amendments were blocked. So there's the story of this bill. I'll stop here. It's a terrible bill, badly written, pushed through hard, and I would say, I do have one or two more slides. Who decided this? Committee chairs, majority leaders, House Speaker, Senate President Pro Tem. There's no transparency, accountability, or representation, or any way for the average voter to know who is supporting this. Why are they supporting this? What's the rationale? What's the process? And what this does is point to the fact that Pennsylvania has an incredibly unresponsive legislature, which Christine was talking about at the beginning. We have an agenda fairness score of 0. That means there are no policies in place to ensure that bills with strong support get a vote, or to ensure that bills, very partisan bills, don't go speeding through. A few partisan gatekeepers can block bills with strong public support, or can push through partisan bills with no public support at all. So what we're trying to do in Fair Districts PA is call attention not just to this terrible bill, but to say our system is broken, our legislature is broken. We need better rules, we need better transparency, we need better representation. And this is a tragic example of how out of touch our legislature is with the people of Pennsylvania and with best practice. I mean, there are states that have scores of 100% where there are public hearings on every bill, where every bill that comes is passed out of committee is guaranteed a vote on the floor, where bills that are passed in the Senate are guaranteed a vote in the House. In Pennsylvania, none of that is in place. You can have a bill pass out of the Pennsylvania Senate unanimously and never, ever get considered in the House. And that happens regularly.
I actually want to interrupt you for a second, because I want everybody to understand how a bill gets passed, right? It has to go through the House and Senate, be approved. It then has to be, the question that's presented, for example, for a constitutional amendment, has to be published. It then has to go a second time in a consecutive session through the House and Senate, be passed. The question has to be published again with the exact same language, and then it can be put on a ballot as a referendum for Pennsylvania voters. The governor does not get to veto it. And there is a reason why this is moving so quickly here. Okay, it has been passed once, right? We are told that it's going to go to the House at the end of the month, and go to the Senate at the beginning of the month, or beginning of February or the end of January. There has been no indication that there's going to be public hearing, testimony, anything. The goal is to rush this through so it can be published again and be put on the primary ballot. This is so dangerous. We all know that many people don't vote in the primary.
And Debbie, that's the primary ballot in 2022?
No, this spring, 2021.
So not only is this a primary that they're going to put it on the ballot for, it's a primary in local elections,
Correct.
Which really don't go out and vote in.
Correct. Right. Thank you. That's even more important. And then not only that, but Independents typically don't vote in a primary, right? They only vote if there is a ballot question. So many independents will not go. So the legislature, the General Assembly, is taking advantage of the fact that this is an off year, that the independents don't vote, and Pennsylvanians have a history of approving ballots, referendums. That's because they think that they've been vetted, right? They think that their legislature has already had, robust discussion, and they are in agreement to putting this on the ballot.
Yeah,
so timing is so important.
So Debbie's described the process for a constitutional amendment. The only way a constitutional amendment gets on the ballot is going through the legislature twice, and then it ends up on the ballot. And as she said, it's interesting, there's been some conversation that it could go to referendum in May. I just heard yesterday that there is a different conversation going on behind the scenes in Harrisburg, which is a realization that in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh, there are some really important local elections, which means there will be a high turnout for those primaries. While in other parts of the state, there's not much going on and there might not be a high turnout. So it is possible that the leadership will think twice about putting this to referendum in May, simply because the turnout for Democrats possibly would be much higher than Republicans. And they're behind the scenes, they're kind of figuring this all out. What's their best option to get this through? What we want to say is don't try to get this through. We know it's already been reintroduced.
Are you saying that our legislators are picking their voters and would pick the constituency who would vote on this? Is that what you're implying?
That's exactly what I'm implying. That's exactly what I'm implying. I accidentally stop the screen share, but that's okay. Yes, they are very much thinking through how to pick their voters for this particular bill.
So the big question for both of you is, what do you want us to do? What can we do? And I want to remind everybody, in all the calls that we've had with Represent, we talk a lot about how, just to put this in perspective, consider the United States Senate under Mitch McConnell and the number of bills that never get brought up for discussion because he controls everything. And both chambers of the Pennsylvania legislature are just like that. It's majority decides what gets brought up and discussed. And you've seen a process they've talked about. And they do it because they don't think any of us are paying attention. Is there anything we can do, Debbie and Carol?
Yes, there's a lot you can do, right? You can write to your representatives. You can educate your friends. So many people do not know about this bill because of the speed and the secrecy with which it has happened, okay? It went through the Senate in July 4th weekend, published probably in the summer in a newspaper, not on the internet. We've had a little bit of other information in the news these days, right? COVID, the elections, this has been lost intentionally. It has not been covered well by the press. So that's really important. They need to hear from you. We have postcards on pmconline.org that you could print up or use that language. Write op-eds, letters to the editors. Just get the word out. People do not know about this.
Yes, and I would say too, as Debbie said, people don't know about it. We have a speakers bureau with Fair Districts PA. I just put a link in the chat for that request a speaker link. So we have speakers who are happy to talk about judicial districts. They're happy to talk about gerrymandering. They're happy to talk about the rules. And they also have a trifecta talk, which is tying the three together to show the connection between the three and to show how the rules make it possible for legislators to block redistricting reform and make it possible for them to push something like this judicial district bill. The more people understand, the more angry they get, the more motivated they get, and the more active they get. And that's really, it's been, for a long time, Pennsylvanians have just said, oh, well, that's the way it is. And I know lots of people who've been very cynical about Harrisburg and said, oh, that's the way it is. Well, it doesn't do you any good to be cynical and say, that's the way it is. You have to understand why that's the way it is, what's behind that, and what could actually change. So in Fair Districts PA, we talk about the tight knot of dysfunction, which is the fact that gerrymandered districts hold some legislators in safe districts. They've rigged the rules so that people with seniority are the ones who control the agenda. So even a newly elected, we've got some wonderful, fairly recently elected Republicans who go in thinking, oh, well, we're going to do it differently. We're going to do it better. We're going to listen to voters. They don't get bills passed. They have no say. It's the people who have the seniority, who have rigged all the rules to control the committees, to control the agenda. And then that blocks reform. And it's a tight little circular knot of dysfunction. So we have to understand how that works. And then we have to find ways to encourage. Wendy Thomas is a person who she's a Republican in Bucks County. She has prime sponsored our redistricting reform bill. She has spoken out on the rules issue. She has been threatened by the extremists in her own party. We need to find ways to encourage and support Republicans in their own caucus. And we also, I mean, if your legislator is a Democrat, writing your legislator a letter is not really helpful, because they already know this needs to change, and they already know they have no way to change it. So if your legislators are Democrats, I would strongly suggest you send those postcards instead to Speaker Brian Cutler, who was a prime sponsor of merit selection bills in the past, who I think knows the system is broken and needs to be better, and needs to hear from voters saying, you know better, do better. You know, that's why you're a leader. Be a courageous leader. Do the right thing here. Don't let the extremists in your party push you around. Do the right thing. So I would say writing letters or postcards to Representative Brian Cutler or to Carrie Benninghoff, who is the majority leader in the House. I believe both of them know better. Both of them know the system is broken. And both of them get a lot of threatening postcards, emails, and phone calls from the most extreme part of their caucus. They need to hear from other people saying, don't let those people run the state. They're destroying your party. They're destroying the state. They're destroying democracy. And you, Representative Brian Cutler, you, Representative Carrie Benninghoff, you are in a place where you could actually change that. And we're asking you to do that. So I would reach out to them. I would write op-eds on that very topic. And the same in the Senate. The new majority leader is a woman, Kim Ward from Westmoreland. I don't think she is particularly up to speed on a lot of these topics, but as women, it would be great to say, we're excited to see a woman in leadership, and we want you to use your leadership to make sure that all the women in the Senate have a voice. And to do that, you have to change the rules and do not change the judicial process. I mean, so reach out to Kim Ward and also reach out to Jake Corman. He's the new president pro tem. So if
I want to interrupt for a second.
Reach out to Republican leadership. That will be far more effective.
So Carol, first, a few things. Everybody should know, you know, somebody asked in the chat, what are the chances of this? The bill was passed pretty much party lines, right? There were a few Republicans who crossed the line because they were given cover, honestly. So we don't know if they will cross the line again. But we only need a few changes, right? You maybe need 5 to 7 representatives in the House and about 3 in the Senate. There are a number of attorneys in the House and Senate who know how bad this bill is, and yet they're holding the party line. You know, if you know them, you know, lawyers, you know, as a lawyer, I want my judge to be independent. He or she may rule against me, but that's what I would expect. I also expect that if the law is on my side, he or she will rule for me. They shouldn't be deciding a case because of whether I will reelect them or, you know, retain them. It's not even reelect, retain them. The other thing that's important is, Carol mentioned Corman, beware. I don't think he will change his viewpoint. His father introduced the same bill about 30 years ago. So there are new people. I would focus on them. I would educate them. I would focus on attorneys. I would focus on collar counties, right? There are collar counties that we all know have turned or are in the process of turning based on, you know, the charts and the pictures from the presidential election. Those are important counties. Those listen to their constituencies.
One other thing I would say about someone like Jake Corman is there are some really big statewide elections coming up in 2 years, including the governor, and there are some ambitious people in our state legislature. And I think it's really important to say, you might get away by playing to your partisan extremes while you're in your safe legislative district. But if you ever have a hope of election in a statewide election, you need to listen to the people across Pennsylvania, all of us, and you need to do what's right for the people of Pennsylvania, all of us. So op-eds, letters to those people just saying, you know, if you ever have any hope of going through this.
I just also posted Chatham University has the Center for Women in Politics in Pennsylvania, which is bipartisan. On January 14th, they're having from 12 to 1, they're having a Women in the General Assembly call. It's open to everybody. And Kim Ward is one of the speakers.
Oh, that's great.
So it's a good opportunity for people to go online, chatham.edu, go on and register for this event for the Center of Women in Politics. So it's just a, you know, it's a different forum so that she hears women speaking, so that she hears that this is of interest. If that call that Chatham is doing is just, are there enough ladies' rooms in the General Assembly? And are you going to run things differently as a woman than as a man? It won't be effective. You're all a lot smarter than that. Call into that and ask these kinds of questions. Let her know that you're interested and you're up to date on these issues. Another commercial.
Great research. Should we look through the chat for questions?
Flora Wolf, do you want to say anything? Because Flora, you're a retired judge. How does it hit you? Can we unmute Flora? Jamie?
Yep, she's on.
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Christine.
Oh, I'm putting you on the spot, Flora, but you're a judge. You know how to do these things. You can dance.
Oh yeah, I can stand on one foot and speak.
Right.
You know, somebody asked the question, why is this different from having county common pleas judges? And the answer is that we hope that the appellate court judges are hearing cases of significance, of statewide importance, and that they are making law, making decisions that will apply equally and equitably across the Commonwealth, and not making law that applies to, oh, our district, or our loyalties, or our issue. So, for example, take fracking. People have very different opinions about it. You don't want law made that reflects what this little district thinks about how they're going to make money off fracking, or this district that, you know, we need impartial judges who are not looking over their shoulders at whether they'll be reelected. When I was running, I thought it was a marvelous safety that we had 10-year terms, and in most places you didn't have to think about whether this decision or that would make voters like you or hate you. If you put judicial, particularly Supreme Court judges, but any of the appellate judges, in districts where they have to watch their mouths, you're eroding the rule of law. It's just making it less impartial, more subject to abuse.
Thank you very much. And I know I put you on the spot by doing that. There's a lot of good comments in the chat. I encourage you to look at them. We'll come up with a summary, and we may have some other questions, and we'll come up with an action list for all of you who are on the call to let you know what you can do. Hey, it's the middle of the winter. It's the pandemic. We're all home, but we can be active and we can make changes in Pennsylvania. And that's been kind of the message of Represent, is how do we make activists out of all of us? but also this is such an important issue and it's just being slid by without everything. So I think every one of you has to have your little list right now. Who are you writing postcards to? Who are you writing op-eds to? Who are you on your Zoom calls with your neighbors, whatever your organizations you belong in, are you bringing up this subject? And it's real easy. Debbie and Carol are real easy to contact and to get them to come and speak to your groups and talk about this, because people need to know. And how can we get Nancy Bernstein? How do we get Carol and Debbie on the morning news and radio shows? And by the way, Nancy Bernstein's from Allegheny County. So these are things, these are statewide issues. You've got to talk about these things throughout the state.
Ironically, Chris, I've been contacted more by the radio and television in Pittsburgh than I have in Philadelphia. I actually wrote to Ali Velshi and Michael Smerconish, said, you're focusing on the big picture, but Pennsylvania is really important and you should hear what's going on in Pennsylvania. Haven't heard back.
Move, because they're both Philadelphians.
Right, but haven't heard back. So if anybody knows them.
I think that we've got over 100 people on this call who can contact Ali Velshi and Michael Smerconish and let them know that this is something you heard about and you want them to elevate this on a higher level. Other places to go, it's just 2 more emails that you have to write. We're going to come up with a list for you, and we hope you're going to act on it. We also hope, let's go to our final slides, Jamie, because it is 9:28 and I like to be true to the time. Thank you all so much for being on this call, for understanding the issue. And thank you, Flora Wolf, for letting me push you a little bit. This is an important thing, and we're going to send out this is what you need to do. And we'll be getting from Debbie and Carol what you need to do to be active. Your voice counts. What are the other strategic initiatives that you think Represent should be working on? We're home. We're doing a good job. We're trying to make sure that we're giving you what you need. I want to hear from people on this call. What are the other issues you think we should be bringing up? What else do you want to know? As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have Kelly Dittmar from the Center for American Women in Politics on our next week, as a matter of fact, talking about how women fared in the elections. Should be another good conversation. And then in February, we expect to talk about what's next for Represent. And but to get there, we want you to contact us and let us know what you'd like to work on. Represent is the core principle, reflective democracy, that we want our elected officials to reflect all of us. Go back to that slide you saw earlier that Carol showed. Does our judicial system, do our judges represent what Pennsylvania looks like? Yes, the legislators have peeled off this one thing. Well, there's nobody from York County. But if you look at some of the broader issues, do we really expect somebody from York County to bring a different point of view than somebody from another county? Or would it be more valuable to make sure that we have more racial diversity on our courts? We're doing well on gender diversity in the courts, not so good in our legislature, but we're making progress. But how do we bring about a more reflective democracy? There's an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer today about John Fetterman, using his national spotlight to run for U.S. Senate. And in this article, they listed about a dozen people who are considering running to take Toomey's spot, both Republicans and Democrats. They're all white, and there's only one woman as part of the whole list, Valar Kush, who's the chair of the Montgomery County Commissioners. But does that, once again, Pennsylvania has, this is one of my soapboxes, Pennsylvania in its long history has never had a woman or a person of color as governor or senator. And it is time. And what we want to talk about is, are you going to be part, one of our side projects could be what does that movement look like? There's so many things that we can do to change Pennsylvania and to change the legislature in our next elections. But there's also so much we can do right now, both making sure that we're holding the legislature accountable to the people of Pennsylvania and setting the stage for 2022. So again, thank you very much to our speakers. It was a very good discussion. The chat was incredibly lively, and we'll be getting back to people on that. And somebody said, is there going to be a talking points email? We'll also be having this presentation. We've been recording it, and we'll have it up on our website shortly. But we'll also send you a list of, I want you to learn to take action. Many of you are real action focused now. Many of you are good fundraisers. There's so much more we can do. It's the winter in Pennsylvania in the pandemic. It's a good thing. So thank you all very much and have a good day.